Will be our first presenter, Chair of the English Department, for all the hard work she's done to help us out. We, of course, want to start by thanking all the creative writing faculty for all they've done. We'd like to start by thanking Dr. Sonny Cook and the World Arts and Cultures Committee for funding Dunya Mikhail's visit. And we appreciate our board members. We also want to make a special thank you to our second presenter, Dr. our Dean, Augustine Albaran. So, I wanted to remind you today, just our events, but you have a flyer on your seat that has the events for the week on it. So I'm not going to take you through the drudgery of going through all of that. But today, I just want to remind you from 2 to 3:15 in this room, we have featured poet Dunya Mikhail, and we hope you're going to attend that. And then tonight, of course, from 7 to 9 p.m., we have our New Voices student reading in this very room, which is going to be awesome, and we hope you come to that as well. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to introduce our presenters for today. So it shouldn't come as any surprise to us that we're living in a really the most technologically advanced age probably that the world has ever known. And I started actually thinking about some literature I'd read, particularly this book was on my mind called Brave New World. Has anybody ever read that? Yeah. Well, as you guys know, that it was written in 1931, and in this book, humans are actually hatched and programmed by the state via technology, a drug called soma, to induce this kind of happy trance in which all they're just obsessed with leisure and pleasure. And I couldn't help but kind of think about the amount of iPads and iPods and tweets and Googles and all the things we're constantly doing to pleasure ourselves technologically in a way and induce a kind of sleep. And in fact, I found this passage I just wanted to read. It's an introduction to a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, which was a very important book on media criticism way back in 1984, when things were supposed to be happening and they didn't. He wrote that what Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. And I started to think about the multiple kinds of distractions we have to induce a kind of cultural sleep, right? I mean, I dare say right now, probably 10 of you have a vibrating cell phone, or you're probably itching to check it, or you're thinking about the next, tweet. That this is a constant kind of state of, I would say, cultural sleep that we're kind of putting ourselves into. And which brings me to kind of the point for today, which is how literature awakens us. And that we need to remind ourselves of the power of poetry and stories and novels to wake us from our sleep, and that they're not information, right? It's not just mere information, it's how we stand outside our lives and see our lives, how we remind ourselves of our humanity. And I wanted to quote Franz Kafka and end here, but Franz Kafka said, "A book should be the axe to break the frozen sea within us." And I think that's, to me, one of the most powerful statements about what a book can do. So today our four presenters are in different ways going to talk about the power of literature and to remind us why it matters to our lives. Our first presenter will be Dr. Aurelie Holder, who is the chair of the English department. She has received Division's Teaching Excellence Award as well as the President's Leadership Award. She has served as the English department chair for the last 6 years and was just re-elected, by the way, to serve another 2-year term. Dr. Holder has taught the full range of composition courses from basic skills through transfer, but the focus of her graduate work and doctoral dissertation was in American literature. And her real passion, as she's noted to me, and many, is American literature and teaching literature as one of her greatest rewards as a teacher. Today, Dr. Holder is going to be talking about the importance of poetry during times of crisis. So please help me welcome her.
Hi, everyone. Is this better?
Yes, yes.
I'm really honored to be the first person on the first event, on the first day of this year's Literary Arts Festival. It is more than a little intimidating, though, to imagine that I've been given the task in 10 or 12 minutes to talk about why literature matters and specifically why poetry is important. I'll give it a shot, but it's quite the challenge. You do have a handout that has some of the full texts of some of the poems that I'll refer to today, so you certainly don't need to look at that while I'm talking, but it's like a teachable moment where you can look at those poems in their entirety later today, tonight, anytime you feel like. So there are multiple reasons that people give for why poetry matters or is important. Great poetry reveals to us multiple realities and therefore has unique cultural and personal significance. Also, there's an intrinsic pleasure to be gained when within a poem the world becomes word. Contemporary poet Elizabeth Alexander observes that poetry models for us precise and mindful language, and it takes our breath away and gives us a new perspective. Ralph Waldo Emerson noted that poetry doesn't need anybody to be an apologist for it because beauty is its own excuse for being. 20th century poets Ezra Pound and William Carlos Williams focus on the newsworthy aspects of poetry, and that's what I'm going to address today as well. Pound notes that poetry is news that stays news. And Williams reminds us that it's difficult to get the news from poetry. Yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. I think we should appropriate a claim that most television journalists trumpet to promote their evening programs. Poetry is the medium that provides us with news we can use. And in times of crisis, such as when Americans attempt to face Vietnam, the aftermath of 9/11, to make sense of maybe the marathon bombings, what we need is the news gained from poetry and from literature. A brief examination of Yusuf Komunyaka's Facing It, about the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial, and Billy Collins's The Names, about the aftermath of 9/11, might help illustrate that poetry can facilitate reflection and help us reach to the heart of the matter in ways mere journalism cannot. In Robin Espes's essay, What Happens When Metaphor Meets a Monument?, she describes how 21-year-old Yale undergraduate Maya Lin, far removed from the Vietnam War, but interested in the architecture of death, submitted the successful design for the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial. Lin imagined that people would see the memorial as a rift in the earth, a long polished black stone wall emerging from and receding into the earth, chronicling a seemingly infinite number of names. Anyone who's seen that wall, the names reverberate. It's profoundly impactful. And that includes Louisiana poet Yusuf Komunyaka, who faced the wall himself. In Facing It, Komunyaka's narrator confronts not only the granite wall, but his own, and by extension our, ambivalence and confusion about the war's consequences. My black face fades, hiding inside the black granite. I turn this way, the stone lets me go. I turn that way, I'm inside the Vietnam Veterans Memorial again, depending on the light to make a difference. I go down the 58,022 names, half expecting to find my own in letters like smoke. I touch the name, Andrew Johnson. I see the booby trap's white flash. As he further contemplates the wall, he sees a white veteran's image floating behind him, coming closer. Then his pale eyes look through mine. I'm a window. He's lost his right arm inside the stone. In the Black Mirror, a woman's trying to erase names. No, no, she's brushing a boy's hair. So what's the news we receive from reading Facing It? That no matter where we are or where the country turns, the wall is insistent. We must face the war and bear stony witness to the consequences on a fragile, vulnerable human flesh and spirit. That touching even one specific name on the wall gives the 58,022 a concrete identity. And that it's futile to think we could erase the names on the wall or remake the past, but that an act of love and tenderness between a mother and son, a brush of the hair, can be one redeeming gesture in face of great loss. Maya Lin said her design aim was to strip things down, not so they become inhuman, but so that you need just the right amount of words and shape to convey what you need to convey. Komunyaku's poem, like Lin's monument, does just that. Former American poet laureate Billy Collins, at a recent appearance at Point Loma Nazarene University, which many of us in this room were lucky enough to go to, expressed his view about why poetry still matters in times of crisis, in times of need, when we're trying to bend our mind around difficult subjects. People turn to poetry in times of crisis, he says, because a poem often tends to connect people to the history of emotion. So it's not just you having the emotion, you're part of a big emotional reverberation that's going through history. Thus, poetry brings us the news from the heart. Collins's poem, The Names, was read in 2002 at a special joint session of Congress that was held to remember the victims of the 9/11 attacks. And just as the names on the granite of the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial reverberate in the minds and hearts of those who see and touch the etchings, so too the names of those lost in 9/11 reverberate in the reading of the names. Just as Komunyaku's narrator touched one specific name on the wall and therefore touched all, so too Collins's narrator universalizes our response to 9/11 by naming names from A to Z. I started with A, with Ackerman as it happened. Then Baxter and Calabro, David and Eberling, names falling into place as droplets fell through the dark. Names printed on the ceiling of the night. Names written in the air and stitched into the cloth of day. At the poem's end, after the narrator has received the final jolt of Z when he reads Zaminsky, the culminating observation both stuns and reassures and moves us past the mere recitation of newsworthy particulars of that day. So many names. There's barely room on the walls of the heart. It's the barely we cling to in that line. There still is room in the human heart to accommodate all the names and transform the tragedies of the world. In Jack Gilbert's wonderful poem, A Brief for the Defense, he opens with exactly the kind of experiences and details that we've come to associate with the evening news. Sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies are not starving someplace, they're starving somewhere else. Nevertheless, there's laughter every day in the terrible streets of Calcutta. The women laugh in the cages of Bombay. We can do without pleasure, Gilbert tells us, but not delight. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. The evening news may incessantly chronicle the sorrows of this world's ruthless furnace, but poetry can bring us news of gladness and delight. without which, as William Carlos Williams noted, we might all die miserably. That's one reason, at least, why poetry still matters.
Our next speaker will be Dean Agustin Alboran, the Dean of the English and Social Behavioral Sciences. Ever since he could remember, he's enjoyed a good story, and his parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles helped shape his love for the printed word through the stories they would tell him about the old country. Hungry for a better understanding of his family heritage, he dove into history books and literature about Mexico. In particular, stories about the border regions of the American Southwest. Today, his presentation will focus on magical realism, in particular, story of the novel Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. Let's welcome Agustin Alboran.
Good morning. Thank you, Pete. Excuse me, Ryan. Thank you. I knew that. And I'd like to thank you all this morning for this opportunity. And I'd also like to thank the members of the English department, fellow presenters, Dr. Orly Holder, Pete Schmidt, and Cassie Lynch. And in addition, I'd also like to thank the members of the Literary Arts Fest Committee who have worked tirelessly to present this festival for you. That is Sidney Brown, Carl Sherlock, Ryan Griffith, and Julie Cardenas for the countless hours that they contributed to make this the 17th unprecedented year in a row. Please give them a warm round of applause. I also want to take just a second to thank the faculty, staff, and administration of Grossmont College, and primarily you, the students that are here today, for this opportunity, and I'm very honored to be here before you. First, I'm going to share with you a little personal history regarding my appreciation of Spanish literature. Next, I'll provide a short summary of Rodolfo Anaya's Bendice mi Ultima, Bless Me Ultima, and then I'll conclude with what I believe is important to this particular piece of writing and why literature matters. As you heard Ryan say before, that I've always remembered, ever since I was just a little guy, all these wonderful stories that my relatives would tell me. My grandfather, my grandmother, every summer we had the opportunity to go back to Mexico City, and I would hear these stories. And they would tell me stories such as La Llorona. Anybody heard that, the story of La Llorona? The Weeping Woman. And these are stories told to scare kids not to go out at night, to be good. Be careful, otherwise, La Llorona is going to come and get you. At the same time, I was fascinated by stories about the Virgen de Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and La Malinche, otherwise known as Doña Marina, the woman who played a role in the Spanish conquest of Mexico. She acted as interpreter, as advisor, and lover to Hernán Cortés in his conquest of the Aztec Empire. So, hungering for a better understanding, I dove into books. I just dove into anything that I could find. National Geographic was really my first exposure. I remember picking up a copy of some wonderful finds that were made in Mayan ruins and Aztec ruins. And then soon after that, I picked up, I don't know where I got it, somebody gave me a copy of the History of Mexico. It was torn and tattered and dog-eared and full of coffee stains, but it was The Course of Mexican History by Myers and Sherman. And so I began to examine those stories from my childhood with the history as we know it. And in particular, I began to become interested in stories of the American Southwest, such as stories by Americo Pardes with a pistol in his hand, otherwise known as the Ballad of Gregorio Cortez. And it was in 1987 when I was enrolled in an English 120 class at Mesa College, just across the way. My professor at the time was Cesar Gonzalez. And when we walked into the room, he announced that we were going to have a guest speaker that day. And it turned out that it was Rodolfo Anaya. It was the author of Bendice mi Ultima. As a class, we had been reading a piece by a contemporary of Anaya. The author is Sabin Ulibarri. He's also from Nuevo Mexico, from New Mexico. And the name of the piece was Se fue por clavos. He went to find nails. And that is found in a tale, or I should say a novella called Mi abuela fumaba puros y otros cuentos de Tierra Maria. The translation is, My mother smoked cigars and other stories of Tierra Maria. So I began to see this fantastical element to literature, and I was just so intrigued by it because I was trying to balance it with what was, my upbringing and the stories that I heard, the history books, and now this wonderful literature before me. At the time in that classroom, it had been about 15 years since Anaya had published his piece, and he had shared with us the difficulty that he had in locating a publisher. He had won an award, and it was published in Berkeley, and he started to get some notoriety. At the time, Anaya was in San Diego to dedicate a new park, which was the Cesar Chavez Park at the foot of the Cesar Chavez Parkway. It was formerly known as Crosby Street Park in Barrio Logan, and that's my birthplace. Anaya shared with us some of the struggles he had in publishing his novel. He encouraged us to write. He said, just write anything. He also encouraged us just to persist in reaching whatever it was our dream that we had, whether it was finishing a paper for an English 120 class, successfully completing a semester. Sound familiar, guys? Obtaining a certificate, a transfer degree, or a diploma at a university. And in the words of Cesar Chavez, si se puede, yes you can. Needless to say, I was very, very much inspired. Anaya's novel weaves a story about human nature, about good versus evil. He creates a synthesis in our Latino culture by blending his main character's Catholic upbringing with the indigenous past of our Chicano ancestors. Anaya does this by incorporating the traditions of history, of culture, and stories of the American Southwest, and in particular, Nuevo Mexico, New Mexico. An impression that I want to leave you with is, today, is about the narrative of conflict in magical realism, as is found in Bendice Mi Ultima, and to share with you what I believe is what matters about literature. Luis Leal, an internationally recognized scholar of Mexican, Chicano, and Latin American literature, who recently passed away, was one of the founders of the field of Chicano literary studies. He said that magical realism is that which cannot be explained, the surreal, the mythological. Magical realism incorporates nature as part of its central theme. Here are a couple of the conflicts in this particular work by Anaya. There's a conflict within the main character, a young boy named Antonio Luna. As he attempts to reconcile his spiritual fulfillment in Catholicism compared with the teachings of his native ways, he is receiving from Ultima, a curandera. It's a native spiritual healer. There's also conflict found between the Mares and Luna families of Antonio's family, of his parents. There is continual conflict present in the boy's family. Anaya writes, Los Mares descended from the Spanish conquistadors and so carry the restless blood of the sea. Los Mares were vaqueros, or cowboys, who roamed the llano, the plains of Mexico, of Nuevo Mexico. Los Luna descended from the native Pueblo farmers who settled in one place and plant by the moonlight. So it was fitting, Anaya says, that these people, the Lunas, came to settle in the valley. They planted their crops and cared for their animals according to the cycles of the moon. They lived their lives, sang their songs, and then died under the changing moon. The moon was their goddess. There's also conflict found in the figure of Christ, God, and a mythological being of the golden carp in Anaya's Les Mi Ultima. This religious conflict theme is exemplified between the God Christ, as Antonio knows him, and his Catholic upbringing, and the golden carp, which is an embodiment of a mythological being and a pagan god of the indigenous people of Nuevo Mexico. Antonio struggles between his family's religious beliefs versus the native culture idea that is new to him. There's also conflict found in Ultima the Healer versus Ultima the Witch. Anaya writes, they knew that the sign of the cross would work against any bruja, a witch, but it had not worked against Ultima. Either she was not a bruja, or their way of thinking had the powers that belonged to the devil himself. He goes on to say, Ultima and I continued to search for plants and roots in the hills, about Antonio. I felt more attached to Ultima than to my own mother. Ultima told me the stories and legends of my ancestors. From her, I learned the glory and the tragedy of the history of my people. And I came to understand how that history stirred within my blood. There's also tension and conflict in the American culture and way of life, and the way of life of the Mayas and the Luna families. Antonio's three brothers went off to fight in World War II and became Americanized in the process. Upon their return, they struggled to make sense of the world that they left behind. They didn't believe in the Catholic ways or Catholicism, nor did they give credence to the indigenous past and the ways of Ultima, the healer. As I finish looking at some of the conflict themes in the novel, here are a few questions that come to mind. How does Antonio struggle to make sense of the conflicts in the novel? The struggle that Antonio undergoes is a spiritual struggle. Catholicism and the indigenous past and the pagan ways. This conflict is the conflict that is between different cultures, and it is central to the book. Between the Spanish-speaking Catholic people with a rich indigenous past and the English-speaking Protestant Americans of the Southwest. Ultima, through her teachings, guides Antonio to help him reconcile these conflicts. Here's a quote from the book. The powers of the doctors and the power of the church had failed to cure my uncle. Now everyone depended on Ultima's magic. Was it possible that there was even more power in Ultima's magic than in the priest? And this is in a vignette that the main character describes when there's a bit of santeria, witchcraft happening. This is an example of the conflict between the traditional native beliefs versus the more dominant Spanish Catholic culture of the American Southwest. In Ultima, Antonio's struggle is syncretized, just as Chicano people and Latinos represent a syncretization of the Iberian Spanish and the indigenous peoples of the New World. Ultima, then, represents a spiritual traditional view. Ultima becomes a balance for Antonio. She grounds him. There is no rush to find answers. She is calm and soothing like the herbs that he helps to find. And like the potion she creates, she heals Antonio's soul. For me, Bendice Me Ultima stands relevant in other works of literature, in the fabric of the other works of literature that we have. Ultima grounds Antonio in his conflict. The novel has an open ending. It is left up to the reader to decide what becomes of Antonio. We can claim Bendice Me Ultima as our own. For me, it represents the diversity of literature, the diversity of a people, and the diversity of America. We need stories of this genre, as they provide insight into Latino culture and insight into Spanish-speaking cultures. Anaya speaks to the values of the American Southwest. Literature is important to me because it incorporates history, mythology, and stories that have been handed down over time. Literary works such as Bendice Me Ultima work with these themes and conflicts that are forever present, such as religion, family values, and good versus evil. Reading pieces such as this can help guide and influence us as we move past these struggles in our daily lives. And for me, this is why literature matters. In closing, I just want to say that this book was actually banned in 2003 in Norwood, Colorado. There was a group of parents, and this was a public school. This was a group of parents who got together and said, "How dare you teach witchcraft to our children?" And people in church were also upset as well. So that was just, 10 years ago, folks. A wonderful piece of literature that was banned. And this is, to me, why, again, literature matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. It's nice to have a dean who can talk lit. Our next speaker is Dr. Pete Schmidt, beloved professor of humanities here at Grossmont College. Pete is Dr. Schmidt, I'm sorry. Dr. Schmidt is particularly interested in that intersection of science fiction or fiction and science or hard science. He has an MA from Arizona State University. I love this thesis title, The History of Atomic Power and the Rise of the American Comic Book Superhero. And his PhD in the History of Science from University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And his dissertation there was on terraforming, an investigation of the boundaries between science and hard science fiction. So please help me welcome Dr. Peachman.
I want to get out of your way. I'm not sure that that's going to help.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, this is not awkward at all. So,
You can take it off, Pete.
Yeah, you can take it.
I'm not going to do that in front of all these people. So, thank you, Brian. A couple things really fast. You'll see that this talk I'm about to give here overlaps with a number of the comments Ryan made in the intro here. It also overlaps with a talk that's happening later this week on a discussion of monsters. So there's a plug for that one. And it also overlaps with what we've already heard from some of these speakers in front of us right now. All that was totally unplanned. So it just sort of speaks to how literature can affect us in so many different ways and interacts with so many different spheres of our life, and we may not even realize it. So we're going to talk about something right now. So again, I got my timer. I use this timer on my students, so it's only fair that I use it on myself. So I am Dr. Peachman, and I teach here in the Humanities Department at Grossmont College. And it's always important to start with a discussion of what exactly is the humanities and what do we do, and that sort of informs my perspective that I'm taking here to come towards the literature. So when we're in our humanities classes, what we're focusing on here is studying values and ideals of past and also present cultures. And what we're trying to do there is understand, sort of uncover the guiding principles of these past cultures. Informs what they thought was important. Why did they do the things that they did? How did that inform the direction of their lives? And when we sort of take that approach, we see that studying values and ideals uncovers a lot about these past cultures, and particularly how they view themselves on many different levels. So we see that we can reveal sort of how they think of themselves on a local level, so amongst each other, individually, one-to-one. On a global level, it kind of covers their position and how they view themselves in the world and their position to nature, their relationship to nature. It also can help us understand their sort of spirit, them on a spiritual level or a moral level. It helps us define how they understand right action or wrong action, what is sin or what is valid. And it'll also help us understand them on an intellectual level, so we can sort of glean their philosophy, we can understand the logic that they took, we can see what sort of superstitions they were acting upon. So these are sort of the bulk of the beliefs that we try to sort of pick apart and get to in our humanities studies. But then we use that to an aim, there's a purpose here, and that is to try to understand how these beliefs influence the stuff that all these different cultures have made. So, for instance, how are cultures' values related to the architecture that they have built? Or how are cultural ideals reflected in paintings from various periods of time? And so through this way, we try to contextualize these cultural artifacts as a way to sort of uncover deeper cultural and historic meaning. And this takes us beyond just appreciating an artifact for its aesthetic beauty or its design. And in this approach really, the beauty and the design become an expression of culture that we can uncover. And literature, of course, is key in this whole process. Literature very often literally spells out cultural beliefs and values in black and white. And it gives us powerful insights into these sort of values and ideals, our beliefs, our aspirations, our fears, our dreams. They're all right there, packaged inside of literature. And so we can use literature as not only just a historic document that shows us a very clear window into a place and time, but also if we sort of take literature on bulk, on a whole, what we really end up with in many ways is a catalog of what it means to be human, not only in the past, but also relevant to our present cultures. So in my presentation here, that's what I'm going to do today, is just tackle briefly 3 different pieces of literature from 3 very different periods of time, and just sort of uncover a little bit about what they're saying. Oops, I'm going backwards. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're going to start with, beginning with again, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which some of you in here might be familiar with. And this is one of the world's, literally one of the world's oldest pieces of literature. And here we have the story of Gilgamesh, who is a godlike but very spoiled king. And throughout the story, Gilgamesh is trying to come to terms with his own mortality. And he takes all these numerous adventures across stupendous landscapes and goes through these incredible encounters as a way to try to come to terms with that mortality. And along the way, he becomes one of Western literature's first monster killers. At one point, he and his friend go to the sacred forest, and their design here is they want to chop down the forest as a way to sort of leave a landmark to show where they've been. But to get to the forest, they have to kill the monstrous Humbaba, who you see here. So they finally fight Humbaba and they decapitate Humbaba, and then they proceed to chop down the forest as a means to sort of mark that they have existed, that they have been. So what we see here is Gilgamesh is very clearly trying to sort of solidify his legacy by taking this action. And it not only speaks to the Mesopotamian culture here, and we see that there is clearly a value for maintaining a legacy, a value for a powerful leader, or a powerful, a courageous leader. Yet at the same time, these ideas are still very relevant to our modern world. And this is something that's remarkable given that the story is 4,000 years old, and it's so far distant from our modern, high-tech, computerized, and stainless steel existence. Yet we see that Gilgamesh embodies this common desire to leave a mark on the world, to leave something behind to prove that we exist, to show that we somehow matter. And this drives people in our modern world to do some stupendous things, like, for instance, fly to the moon and plant a flag. To incomprehensibly jump from a balloon at the edge of space, to run for president, and to run ultramarathons. And so what we see is that clearly Mesopotamians shared fundamental human traits that are still relevant to our modern world. So the messages and themes of Gilgamesh are reflected in epic literature that span the next 3,000 years. And again and again and again, we're presented with men of great power using their ability to triumph over incredible situations, be it fighting off hordes of enemies or overcoming outstanding odds to survive improbable situations. And like Gilgamesh, these stories that span this 3,000 years often involve encounters with monsters and beasts as a way to highlight what is most valued in people and illustrate ideals that cultures hold most dear. Those things are put on display when we have to fight monsters. And of course, often these values very clearly center on the value for powerful men and the importance of things like honor and bravery. It takes a female author from the Victorian period to fundamentally challenge this narrative. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein challenges the belief that conquering monsters brings out the best in us. At the same time, she questions very dearly what it means to be a monster and what it means to act monstrously. So we're all familiar with the fact that Victor Frankenstein is compelled to leave his mark on the world, much like Gilgamesh was. But he chooses to do so through science rather than the sword. He seeks the secret of immortality, again, like Gilgamesh, and ultimately uses that knowledge to create what he defines as a perfect human being. Blinded by his obsession to create the perfect human being, he cannot see the monstrous acts that he is undertaking, nor can he realize that the creature he is making is itself quite monstrous. This realization only hits him once the creature is fully animated. Victor, then, shocked by the horror of what he has done, instead of embracing the creature, abandons it. Helpless and alone, the creature is forced out into a world that it does not understand, which punishes him mercilessly and isolates him from every meaningful part of human existence. Shelley provides us here with a clear window into Victorian sensibilities and culture that puts tremendous value on the power of science to uncover truths of the world, but simultaneously expresses a growing anxiety about the power of science, especially its ability it instills in humanity to act like God. In her story, this ability allows humans to act like monsters, and in this case, the monster to act heroic. In this case, she's basically flipping those roles. The power of her book is striking, and the imagery is something that still resonates with us today. Scientific achievements are often described described as potential Frankenstein's monsters, such as the history of atomic weapons. And developments like genetically modified foods are labeled Frankenfood. With her book, Shelley encapsulates this value for and fear of science, one that still informs and influences our modern American culture. The monstrous reappears once again at the outset of the 20th century. Rather than making us all gods, like Shelley predicted, science and technology have led to an industrialized world that has dehumanized us and made us all into monsters. This vision comes to us from Frank Kafka's novella, The Metamorphosis, which captures the meaninglessness of our culture that has wholeheartedly embraced industrial values and illustrates the feeling of disenfranchisement that creates. Gregor Samsa represents the human experience in this world. He shows the impact of modern value for slavish devotion to work at the expense of any individual humanity. For his job, Gregor is forced to work inhuman hours and is constantly traveling, removing him from any sort of meaningful social contact. Reflecting modern values, his parents are obsessed with material possessions and status, so are economically dependent on Gregor to provide those things for him. He exists only as a source of income and a means to maintain their middle-class veneer, rather than as a human member of the family. He is also constantly under the watch of his boss, who monitors his every action to extract as much work out of him as he can to make sure he is not stealing, further degrading his sense of freedom and autonomy. It is under these conditions that one day, Gregor wakes up having been inexplicably transformed into a giant bug. In Kafka's vision, the values of the industrial world have transformed Gregor into something other than human. Kafka describes Gregor's experience as a bug in great detail that allows us as readers to feel the discombobulation of Gregor's unreal circumstance. Yet Kafka never provides a reason for the transformation, and Gregor Samsa himself never seems to wonder how this happened. As readers, we baffle at the fact that Gregor's immediate concern upon realizing his condition as a giant cockroach is not how or why he has been transformed, but rather how he will open his bedroom door and get to work in his new body. For readers, this reaction makes Gregor's circumstance all the more surreal, but further drives home the absurdity of modern values for material possessions and status that relentlessly drive us all into inhuman, isolating conditions and the daily grind of often meaningless work. So I think you can see just from those brief examples from very different cultures at very different periods of time, that literature in many ways can act as a historic document. So from the Mesopotamian culture, we see that there's a document here, an actual account that shows the importance of leaders and qualities that they wanted those leaders to have. From Victorian England, we see literature acting as a historical document that shows the importance of science at the time and the anxiety that's growing around that science. And from the modern Western European world, we see a clear depiction of industrial values, and in this case, a sort of critique of the effect of those industrial values on humanity. So there it works as a historical document, but at the same time, it also captures our shared human experience. These three different texts from three very different periods reflect experiences that we all have in common. This sort of sense that we need to leave something behind, a value for legacy, concerns about things that are changing or things that we cannot control, and at the same time, a search for meaning in an often meaningless world. And in exactly 12 minutes, that's why I think literature matters.
Okay, and our final presenter today is one of our favorite Grossmont students, beloved Cass Lynch. And I asked her for a bio, and she said, I don't have a degree or anything like those other people. Because we all know that master's degrees make you smart. So, I guess I'll just have to make it up, because I'll just say Cass Lynch has taken many of our courses here, and literature, creative writing, and unanimously we all think she's incredibly intuitive, bright, and scholarly, and we're happy to have her here today speaking on how literature saved her life. Please welcome her.
That was certainly more of an introduction than I think I deserve. I'll come back when I have my degrees and then we can write.
Good.
I feel absolutely honored to be speaking with these people today, mainly because I don't have the academic experience. So I'm just going to be sharing with you my personal experiences with literature and how, yes it did, it saved my life. And I'd like to dedicate my speech to a British actor named Richard Griffiths, who passed away at the end of March. He was probably most famous for playing Uncle Vernon in the Harry Potter series. When I was first approached with the opportunity of presenting on this panel by Sidney Brown, I thought, no problem, easy. I can talk for hours on the importance of literature as a voice for revolution and social change, how books have a way of multiplying behind our backs on shelves until it's necessary to spend time with friends in their homes because ours only have a small pathway from the door to the bathroom and to bed. But then Professor Brown said, I thought you could discuss how literature saved your life. I nodded and said, sure, makes sense, yeah, but I was terrified. I wasn't going to regurgitate gobbets and ideology from long dead or well-established literary critics and authors. I was expected to relate myself to an audience, to tell them things about my life which I have only begun admitting or understanding within the past year, to be me telling my story, not a student reading the paper. I wasn't quite sure where to begin, what details to leave out, or why anyone would care, but then I watched one of my favorite films and was reminded of the chance that my life isn't that much different from many who might be listening. I found the courage to write. In The History Boys, a play written by Alan Bennett, which we later adapted into film, Richard Griffith's character, an English professor named Hector, is sitting in a classroom with a student. He has the boy recite Thomas Hardy's poem, Drummer Hodge, and when the boy reflects on the lonely tone of the poem, Griffiths tells him the best moments in reading are when you come across something, a thought, a feeling, a way of looking at things that you thought special, particular to you. And here it is, set down by someone else, a person you've never met, maybe even someone long dead, and it's as if a hand has come out and taken yours. Hector reaches his open hand towards the student, his eyes closed, lost to his words, and the boy reaches for him, but they do not touch. There's solidarity and companionship within these moments, a silent understanding of what it means to be human, to be lonely, to think that you're the only one of your kind alive. That's the truth of literature. When I was little, I didn't look much like anyone in my school. We were a fairly diverse bunch ethnically, but no one else had a flat nose with a cleft lip, spoke with a lisp because of a cleft palate, or had crooked teeth with quite a few missing because of low bone density in their upper jaws. None of my peers wanted to be my friend because I looked different. I had a major facial deformity. Thankfully, my parents had anticipated bullying and me being made an outcast. They had taught me to read before sending me off to elementary school, so I honestly didn't pay attention to much of this early ostracism because I was always absorbed in a book. One of my first favorites was Dracula. I purchased it during a book fair in 4th grade with my allowance, and apart from an obsession with vampires in Victorian England, which led me into goth life by age 10, Stoker showed me that what I could expect from life as an outsider. I never identified with Mina or Lucy, and I thought Jonathan was a terribly rude house guest. Count Dracula was regal, considered ominous and powerful by those around him, and he liked wolves. He lived in a huge house in the middle of the forest, and in the end, he lost the woman he loved because the townsfolk, led by Van Helsing, decided he was too weird for their city, and therefore must have been evil, so they killed him. This isn't a literary analysis, mind you, but how my brain interpreted the story between the ages of 9 and 13. Without this book, I would have listened to the children in school who called me names like Hairlip and Bunnyface, those being the only ones suitable for repeating in polite conversation. I would have cried more often than I did and believed that I was scary and a freak. I figured if Dracula was considered these things by the people in his life, maybe it wasn't us. Maybe they were the freakish ones. However, I entered middle school a husk of the child I was for such a brief couple of years after discovering Stoker's book. I had been diagnosed with manic depression the year prior after suffering a serious injury when a bully fell on top of me during recess, snapping my right arm at the elbow backwards. Due to immobility from the joint fusing together and extensive nerve damage, my dream of riding horses on the U.S. Olympic team when I grew up was buried with Dracula's severed head, and I received strict doctor's orders not to be around horses or play football, soccer to most of you, any longer, my favorite non-equestrian sport. I had also been molested by an older cousin during the summer and lost one of the only friends I'd made at school because she said I frightened her and was only my friend because she was worried I would do something bad if she told me otherwise. In addition, my parents didn't believe in mental illness and I was too ashamed to tell them about being molested. I was convinced I had done something wrong, something to deserve what had happened. I didn't try to make friends and I began to acting exactly how my peers imagined I, a freak, would act. I cursed constantly, defied teachers and anyone in an authoritarian position, found ways to procure alcohol so I could get drunk, and snuck out late at night to wander around the city. I was a poster child for Freud's death drive. I wanted to die. People grew increasingly afraid of me. I wore only black with bright blue lip stain, thick eyeliner, and an assortment of chains and spikes. I talked about drinking blood and conversing with dead English poets through my Ouija board. I thought bullying would stop, and people would finally leave me alone, but it only got worse. Things became so volatile that I would vomit before each morning and hide in the library or the bathroom until I thought the campus was empty. My grades suffered a bit and I became a complete introvert. A group of girls decided to get me expelled by telling a counselor I'd invited one of them over to my house, where she was greeted by loud satanic music and then watched in horror as I gutted a white cat and nailed it to a signpost on my street. The counselor was the head of my school's Bible study club, and she didn't like the unchristian way I dressed and the type of values I promoted. Her words, meaning the books I always had with me. She said what I'd done was unforgivable, disgusting. I felt defeated, so I began fiddling with my backpack while she tutted. "Wait a minute," I shouted. "I told you, they're liars." She flinched at my accusation. I yanked out a book and threw it at her. She looked at the cover and her nostrils flared. She asked me what it proved. "Last week, I was reading a book during free time in history. Read the first page or two." She told me she didn't have to. She'd never read any of his work and never would. I needed to stop playing games. I snatched it away and began reading. She all but stuck her fingers in her ears. There it was, a brief line describing a husband seeing a gutted cat nailed to a signpost while he drove with his wife through the Nevada desert. "They must have read it while I went to the bathroom and lied to you to get me in trouble," I said. She sent me back to class. No apology, no eye contact. "Stephen King is banned in the school library," she said while moving to the door, "for a reason." I was advised ad nauseum in middle school by teachers that my books weren't allowed in the library and how curious it was that my parents let me read such questionable content. Anthony Burgess, Nietzsche, J.D. Salinger, Stephen King, Ray Bradbury. I couldn't understand why anyone cared. Near the end of 7th grade, a teacher's assistant befriended me over a mutual love for Edgar Allan Poe. I was 13 and he acted like a friend, someone who understood how I felt, who liked to read. One morning before school, while I waited at my desk for class to begin, he sexually assaulted me, and when I told the counselor, the woman from before, she said it was a sin to lie. I didn't protest. I felt ashamed. My behavior became worse. I stopped reading because I felt as if my books had betrayed me. I felt like Montresor in the Cask of Amontillado, only Poe had lied to me. In the end, I was the one who suffered unjustly at the hands of someone who claimed friendship. I was the one being left to die behind a brick wall, and this school would be my tomb. I was Fortunato. I tried to commit suicide 3 times before the end of 8th grade, and the only time I didn't feel like dying, the only time I'd sit quietly through class and not challenge teachers on their poor grammar or inaccurate facts from ancient texts, was when I had a book open. That's the thing about literature. If a story is written well, it's like living a new life when those spines creak and the pages whisper their greetings. Ray Bradbury likened the smell of old books to exotic spices. And that perfect concoction of one's weight and its smell transcends all of our natural laws. The authors have created tiny worlds for us, and all we need to do is open them to escape. My pathway had been taken though, and instead of trying to find the next book, which would help me the way Dracula had when I was little, I swallowed prescription painkillers which had been given to me for my arm, and I opened a surgical wound on my wrist with a steak knife. But I failed. I became lost. So I trudged my way into high school with no friends and the desire to kill myself before the end of my freshman year. By chance, however, I stumbled upon a writer named Neil Gaiman. I was wandering through a local bookstore when one of his covers caught my eye. There was a deserted road, lightning was striking at the point it met with the horizon. American Gods, it was called. I bought the book and read it through 4 times by the end of the year. The spine broke and I had to tape it together. I fell into Shadow, the protagonist. I was alone. I hated the world, or I didn't much care for it, I wasn't sure. I was doing what everyone else wanted, and I had no idea what in the hell life expected from me. He asked questions I'd held inside for years. He felt the same way I did about quiet. We even interacted with people in the same mild-mannered, aloof way. So each time I would read the book, nothing outside mattered. I pulled out of my depression a bit. I started paying attention again in class. I bought everything Gaiman had written or touched, and he got me through high school. He got me into Stanford. I dropped out, but he got me there and showed me I would have been so dumb to not realize life wasn't a punishment. This is a small reflection, really, on what I could say about books and what they have done for me. I've picked some of the most important pieces out of the past because I wanted to tell everyone how I found myself in books. Even when I thought there was no point in taking another breath or forcing myself through another day of abuse and ostracism, the right book could show me how very foolish I was. Bram Stoker taught me there will always be bullies, and sometimes you might lose your head and watch the whiny guy walk off with your girl. King, Bradbury, Burgess, and Poe taught me horrible things happen in this world, and each life is what you make it. That believing it's too late to change things or better your situation is to resign yourself to the world and its people being better, stronger, or smarter than you. I'm forever indebted to these writers, but that's another beauty of literature. They're writing because each one of them, it felt exactly the way I did at some point in their lives. They put it on the paper. Every person's life is written in a book or a story somewhere. Yours might be in a secondhand shop in Coventry or a chain store anywhere across the US. It might even be in a cafe in New Delhi, propping up a wobbly table. It's our job to not abandon the search, to not stop looking for that one person who understood us and put it in a book. They're waiting for us to find them. Thank you so much.
So we have about 15 minutes, and we wanted to open it up if you had questions for the panel in general or a particular panelist. What's that? Oh, there's one there too. So does anybody, or if you wanted to just to make an observation, you're also welcome to do that. So does anyone have a question for the panel, an observation, an idea? This is where the tumbleweed rolls across the room. Yes?
I just want to commend Cass, because that was a really brave thing that you did, and it was really amazing, and thank you very much.
Yes.
I also want to say something. I think you found your purpose today in life to speak to us. So good thing you didn't die of suicide.
Any other more observations? Yes.
I think something beautiful about this panel is that regardless of everything everybody had said, I mean, literature has come to us in a way that's improved our lives. And so for the other three that hadn't quite talked about, what specifically was improved in your life by literature?
She said it's for you. I think it's on.
Is this on? So the question again was, what has improved?
In your life due to literature.
Wow. That's really hard. I mean, Cass had a lot of time to think about Improvement, I think that sense of loneliness until you find a voice that speaks to you. And for me, the first writer that I became just absolutely obsessed with was Jane Austen. And I have no idea why. I can reread Pride and Prejudice a million times, and somehow it just, it spoke to so many things to me. And so I think finding a space, where you can read something that's so absorbing that nothing else really matters. I think that was really important. It became a safe place, maybe part of what Cass was mentioning too, where once you find that, then there's nothing, any other barriers or challenges can be overcome because there's a safe place where you can reconnect and find yourself again. And so I think for everybody, it's, it became different authors over time, but certainly, initially something in Jane Austen spoke to me, and I could keep coming back to her to regroup.
For me, literature, I think, helped me to identify with my own struggles as a young man. I come from a very large family. I have 8 siblings. They're all women. 4 older and 4 younger, and 4 were born in Mexico City, and I was the first one born in this country, and 4 more came after me. And actually I didn't learn English until I was about 5 years of age, until I started school, because Spanish was the only language spoken in our home. So I began to identify with some of the characters and the pieces that I read, and it just, I always questioned, well, what is it about, Catholicism? What is it about religion? Oh, I get that. The same guy, is born at this time of the year, and then later at another time of the year, he dies, and 3 days later he comes back. And I began to identify with some of the rich indigenous past, and I just questioned it. I had a lot of questions for my parents, and they wondered, why are you such a questioning individual? I said, well, I need to know more. I want to know more. And it was pieces such as this, or Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, or 100 Years of Solitude, and other pieces where I began to identify. And it saved me in the sense that literature brought me to sort of a formalized education. In Spanish we say that you have instrucción or you have educación. Educación, what we call education, is what you receive in the home, and instrucción, formal education, is what you get at college or university. And it was through literature that I really opened my world to all of education. And it's the reason why I've chosen the career that I have, and I'm here today.
Yeah, so I don't think you can say it better than Cass, really. I think that was so well done. This notion that that all of us has a book out there, I think that's pretty much it. I think that's sort of what it's done for me as well, is the hit on that moment when you're reading through this book. It doesn't matter what genre it might be, but you recognize somebody in that book having the same thoughts or the same criticisms or the same sort of experiences as you. And man, that could be a really great thing sometimes, and that's like a powerful feeling, because then you connect to someone who's actually put those sort of thoughts down in words, and you can go, yeah, that's it right there. I just haven't put it in those words before. And that is really empowering in a lot of ways, and I think that's something there. But when you first asked the question, the three words I wrote down were faith and humanity. And it's because it shows that commonality that we have when we read these books, and we can see people have had these similar experiences to us, and there is a reflection out there of the thoughts in our brains. And then you get a connection, and it sort of leads us to, okay, things can get better, and there is hope to connect with other people, and there's meaning that we can ascertain. And again, that's one reason why I'm often drawn to science fiction, because yeah, it might be really corny and hokey sometimes, but science fiction really celebrates the best that humanity can be. And that's a kind of a cool thing and a really great message, especially over the past few decades or so, where things have been pretty dark. And we can see alternative paths that we can take. And it's just a matter of putting the action into place. The literature gives us the vision, and we just need the action for the path. And I think that's something that's given me a lot. So.